She was thrown out with just a suitcase. 6 months later, she owned the mansion. The billionaire husband thought he'd won, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail. The empire he built wasn't actually his. This is the story of the ultimate revenge, and the shocking twist that destroyed everything. The perfect betrayal. The champagne flutes caught the last rays of California sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Malibu mansion. Sophia Chen adjusted a crystal vase filled with white orchids, her movements precise and elegant as always. After 23 years of marriage to tech mogul Marcus Chen, she had perfected the art of creating beauty in their sprawling glass and steel fortress overlooking the Pacific. At 45, Sophia possessed the kind of understated elegance that money couldn't buy but could certainly enhance. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sophisticated chignon, and her simple black dress spoke of quiet confidence rather than ostentation. She was the invisible hand that made Marcus's world run smoothly, the curator of their social life, the architect of their home, the woman who turned his ambitious dreams into gracious reality. Tonight was supposed to be special. Their anniversary dinner, just the two of them for once without the endless parade of investors, politicians, and Hollywood elite that usually filled their home. Sophia had dismissed the staff early, prepared Marcus's favorite meal herself, and even selected a bottle of the 1982 Bordeaux he'd been saving for a truly momentous occasion. The sound of tires on gravel made her heart lift with anticipation, but instead of Marcus's usual Tesla, she heard the aggressive purr of his McLaren, the car he only drove when he was feeling reckless or celebratory. Through the expansive windows, she watched him emerge from the low-slung sports car, his salt and pepper hair gleaming in the golden hour light. At 52, Marcus Chen was still devastatingly handsome, his success having added gravity and power to features that had once been merely attractive. But he wasn't alone. The passenger door opened, and out stepped a woman who looked like she'd been designed by algorithm and ambition. Tall, blonde, and young, probably no more than 28, she moved with the calculated grace of someone who knew she was being watched. Her dress was red and tight, leaving little to the imagination, and her smile was predatory as she surveyed the mansion that Sophia had spent decades turning into a home. Sophia's blood turned to ice in her veins as she watched her husband place his hand on the small of the stranger's back, guiding her toward the front door with familiar intimacy. This wasn't a business associate. This wasn't a colleague who needed a ride. This was something else entirely. The front door opened with Marcus's confident stride, and he called out, "Sophia, we have company." Company. As if this woman were a dinner guest rather than a knife to the heart of their marriage. "Marcus?" Sophia's voice carried from the living room, carefully modulated to hide the earthquake happening inside her chest. "I thought we were having dinner alone tonight." He appeared in the doorway of their living room, the woman beside him like a declaration of war. Up close, she was even more stunning, the kind of beauty that social media had weaponized, with perfect skin, impossibly long lashes, and lips that seemed to pout even in repose. "Change of plans," Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge Sophia had never heard before. It wasn't apologetic, it was almost triumphant. "Sophia, this is Amber Rivers. She's someone very important to me." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Sophia felt her carefully constructed world beginning to tilt on its axis, but years of social training kept her spine straight and her expression serene. "How lovely," she managed, extending her hand to the other woman. "Any friend of Marcus's is welcome here." Amber's handshake was brief and dismissive, her attention already wandering to the priceless art on the walls, the designer furniture, the obvious signs of wealth and taste. When she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. "Marcus has told me so much about this place," Amber said, her voice carrying a slight Valley Girl inflection that made every word sound like a question. "It's even more amazing than the photos." Photos. Marcus had shown this woman photographs of their home, the intimate spaces they had created together, the rooms where they had loved and laughed and built a life. The violation was breathtaking. "I hope you don't mind," Marcus continued, pouring himself a scotch from the bar cart Sophia had carefully stocked with his favorites. He didn't offer her one, a small cruelty that cut deeper than it should have. But Amber and I have something to celebrate. Oh? Sophia's voice was steady, but her hands had begun to tremble slightly. She clasped them behind her back, a gesture that Marcus would have recognized if he had been looking at her instead of gazing adoringly at his companion. Amber giggled, actually giggled, and held out her left hand. On her ring finger sat a diamond so large it seemed almost vulgar, catching the light like a disco ball. "We're engaged," she announced, as if she were sharing news about winning the lottery rather than destroying a 23-year marriage. The world stopped. Sophia heard the words, understood their meaning, but for a moment her brain simply refused to process them. Engaged. Marcus was engaged to this child, while still married to her. That's, Sophia began, then stopped. What was it? Wonderful? Impossible? The end of everything she thought she knew about her life? Marcus finally looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Not guilt, not apology, satisfaction. He was enjoying this. "I know it's sudden," he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he used with difficult board members. "But sometimes you have to follow your heart. I'm filing for divorce on Monday. My lawyer says it should be straightforward given the prenup." The prenup, the document she had signed 24 years ago, young and in love and trusting completely in the man she was about to marry. She had barely read it, dismissing her father's concerns and her lawyer's warnings. She had been marrying for love, not money. She had never imagined she would need to protect herself from the man she loved more than her own life. "Where will you go?" Amber asked, and there was something in her tone that suggested she already knew the answer. "I mean, this is such a big house for one person." The implication was clear. Sophia would be leaving. This woman had already moved in, mentally, if not physically. She was measuring curtains and planning renovations while Sophia stood there, still trying to process that her marriage was over. Sophia started, then stopped. Where would she go? This mansion had been her world for more than 2 decades. Every room held memories. Every corner reflected her taste and care. The garden she had designed, the art she had selected, the life she had built with patient devotion. All of it was about to be erased. "The staff will help you pack," Marcus said dismissively. "I've already spoken to them. You can take your personal items, of course. Your clothes, jewelry, that sort of thing. Your personal items." As if 23 years of marriage could be reduced to a few suitcases. As if the woman who had built his home, curated his life, and sacrificed her own dreams to fuel his ambitions, was just another employee being terminated. Amber wandered over to the grand piano, running her perfectly manicured fingers over the keys. "Does this thing actually work, or is it just for show?" she asked, pressing a key and wincing at the sound. "It's kind of old-fashioned, don't you think? I was thinking we could replace it with something more modern, maybe one of those cool digital ones." The piano had belonged to Sophia's grandmother. She had played it as a child and had insisted on moving it here when she married Marcus. It was one of the few pieces of her past she had kept, one of the few things that was truly hers rather than theirs. "That piano is staying," Sophia said quietly, and both Marcus and Amber turned to look at her with surprise. "Actually," Marcus said, his voice turning cold, "everything in this house is staying. Check the prenup, Sophia. You're entitled to what you brought into the marriage, which, if memory serves, wasn't much." The cruelty was surgical in its precision. He was right, of course. She had come into their marriage with little more than her education, her dreams, and her grandmother's piano. Everything else, the art, the furniture, the life they had built, was legally his. But Marcus had forgotten something important about his wife. Before she became Mrs. Marcus Chen, before she became the perfect hostess and devoted partner, Sophia had been someone else entirely. Someone with her own dreams, her own ambitions, her own secrets. And some secrets, once revealed, have the power to destroy empires. You're right, Sophia said finally, her voice gaining strength. I should check the prenup, very carefully. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, a brief shadow of uncertainty. But Amber was already pulling him toward the terrace, chattering about their dinner plans and the exclusive restaurant where they had reservations. Don't wait up, Marcus called over his shoulder as they headed for the door. We'll be late. And then they were gone, leaving Sophia alone in the home she had spent decades creating, surrounded by the life she was about to lose. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the sound of the McLaren's engine fading into the distance. Then slowly she walked to the safe hidden behind the Picasso in Marcus's study, the safe whose combination he thought only he knew. Inside, beneath insurance papers and stock certificates, was a worn leather portfolio she hadn't touched in 24 years. A portfolio containing documents that would change everything, because Marcus Chen had made a critical error in his perfect plan to discard his wife. He had assumed she was the same naive young woman who had signed that prenup with starry eyes and complete trust. He had forgotten that before she became his wife, Sophia Chen had been Sophia Liu, a brilliant business strategist who had once authored the plan that became the foundation of his entire empire. And she had kept the receipts. The war was about to begin, and Marcus had no idea he had already lost. Part 2. The Ghost in the Machine. The Beverly Hills Hotel suite was a gilded cage of cream silk and rose-colored marble that felt both luxurious and suffocating. For 3 days, Sophia had barely left the room, surviving on room service she couldn't taste and staring at the city lights through floor-to-ceiling windows that felt like prison bars. The media had been swift and merciless. Tech titan's wife replaced by Instagram influencer, screamed the headlines. The photographs were devastating. Marcus and Amber at dinner, laughing and radiant, juxtaposed with a paparazzi shot of Sophia, leaving the mansion with her suitcases, looking shell-shocked and diminished. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from concerned friends, gloating enemies, and reporters hungry for a statement. She ignored them all except for one name that appeared on her screen at 2 a.m. on the third night. Rachel Kim. Rachel wasn't a Malibu friend. She was a pre-Marcus friend, a college roommate who had become one of San Francisco's most feared corporate attorneys. She was brilliant, ruthless, and had never been impressed by Marcus's wealth or charm. I'm catching the first flight down, Rachel said without preamble when Sophia finally answered. Don't sign anything, don't talk to anyone, and for God's sake don't let them steamroll you into a quick settlement. Rachel, you don't understand, Sophia whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. The prenup is ironclad. I have nothing. I am nothing. Bullshit, Rachel snapped. You're Sophia Liu. You were solving impossible problems before Marcus Chen was even a footnote in tech history. And if I know you, which I do, you didn't spend 23 years building that man's empire without keeping some insurance. After the call, Sophia felt something shift inside her chest. The fog of shock and self-pity began to clear, replaced by something colder and more focused. Rachel was right about one thing. She had been someone before she became Mrs. Marcus Chen, someone formidable. She walked to the leather portfolio she'd retrieved from Marcus's safe, her hands steadier than they'd been in days. Inside, beneath old tax documents and insurance papers, was a document she hadn't looked at in over 2 decades, the original business plan for Project Phoenix. 24 years ago, Marcus had been a mid-level analyst at Goldman Sachs, brilliant but stuck, hitting ceiling after ceiling in the rigid hierarchy of traditional finance. Sophia, meanwhile, had been working at a small venture capital firm, but her mind was always spinning with bigger ideas, patterns others couldn't see. She had spent 8 months developing a revolutionary investment strategy, a way to identify and nurture early-stage tech companies using principles borrowed from ecosystem biology. Instead of betting on individual companies, Project Phoenix proposed creating networks of interconnected startups that would support and strengthen each other, like a digital coral reef. She had given the plan to Marcus as an engagement gift, complete with market analysis, implementation strategies, and financial projections. This is how you build your own kingdom, she had told him, starry-eyed and completely in love. Marcus, had used her strategy almost word for word to launch Chen Dynamics, his first venture capital fund. He'd never mentioned her contribution, not to investors, not to the press, not even to his closest friends. Over the years, as his success grew and her plan became the foundation of a tech empire worth billions, the omission had become a lie so big it swallowed the truth entirely. But Sophia had been careful in one crucial way. Following her father's advice, she had notarized the original document and kept a copy of their handwritten partnership agreement, a simple one-page contract they'd both signed stating they were equal partners in all business ventures undertaken together. It had seemed romantic at the time, two young lovers planning to conquer the world together. Now it looked like what it actually was, legal dynamite. Her phone rang. Marcus's lawyer, David Sterling, a man whose voice oozed expensive condescension. "Mrs. Chen," he began, "I trust you've had time to process recent events. Mr. Chen is prepared to be very generous in the divorce settlement, well beyond what the prenuptial agreement requires." Sophia's grip tightened on the Project Phoenix document. "Define generous, Mr. Sterling." $5 million plus a modest monthly allowance for 3 years. Enough to purchase a lovely home and maintain your lifestyle at a comfortable level. $5 million. Out of a fortune worth over $50 billion. It was an insult disguised as largesse. "That's very kind of Marcus," Sophia said, her voice deceptively mild. "But I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh? You see, Mr. Sterling, you and your client are operating under a false assumption. You believe you're negotiating with Marcus's soon-to-be ex-wife, but your actual negotiation is with his founding business partner." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "I'm not sure I understand," Sterling finally managed. "You will," Sophia said calmly. "My attorney will be in contact within 48 hours. Her name is Rachel Kim. I suggest you look her up." She hung up before he could respond. Meanwhile, at the Malibu mansion, Amber was in her element, documenting her new life for her 3.2 million Instagram followers. She filmed herself doing yoga by the infinity pool, trying on clothes in what had been Sophia's walk-in closet, now equipped with a professional ring light and backdrop, and giving tours of the mansion's most photogenic rooms. "Living my absolute best life," she captioned a video of herself lounging on the terrace in a designer bikini. Sometimes the universe just knows when it's time for an upgrade. Marcus watched from his study, feeling a growing irritation he couldn't quite name. The constant filming, the shallow commentary, the way she referred to his home as if it were a vacation rental. It all felt wrong somehow. He had expected to feel triumphant, liberated, powerful. Instead, he felt vaguely hollow. His assistant buzzed in. "Mr. Chen, your attorney is on line 1. He says it's urgent." Marcus picked up, already annoyed. "This better be important, David." "We have a problem," Sterling said, his voice tight with worry. "I just spoke with your wife's new attorney, Rachel Kim." Marcus frowned. "Never heard of her." "You should have. She's the one who took down Harrison Industries last year. And Marcus, she's claiming Sophia has some kind of partnership agreement with you that predates the marriage." "That's impossible," Marcus said. But even as he spoke, a cold finger of unease traced down his spine. There had been papers, early on, documents they'd both signed when they were young and drunk on love and ambition. But those had been symbolic, romantic gestures. Hadn't they? "She says they'll be filing suit not for divorce settlement, but for dissolution of a business partnership and recovery of stolen intellectual property." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Stolen intellectual property. Project Phoenix. The plan that had launched everything, the strategy that had made him billions. The plan Sophia had written. He had buried that memory so deep he'd almost convinced himself it was false. Over the years, as journalists wrote about his brilliant innovation and revolutionary strategy, he'd begun to believe his own revisionist history. He was the genius. He was the visionary. Sophia had just been there. But she hadn't just been there. She had been the architect. "Get me everything we have on the early Chen Dynamics documents," he said, his voice hoarse. "Everything, from before the wedding." Marcus, if she has what she claims to have, just get me the files, Marcus snapped, then hung up. Amber wandered into his study, fresh from filming a Get Ready With Me video in the master bathroom. Baby, you look stressed. Is everything okay? He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time saw not a prize he'd won, but a liability he'd acquired. A beautiful, vapid liability who was broadcasting his private life to millions of strangers. Everything's fine, he lied, but nothing was fine. In trying to erase Sophia from his life, he had awakened something far more dangerous than a scorned wife. He had created an enemy who knew exactly where all the bodies were buried, because she had helped him bury them. That evening, Rachel Kim arrived at the Beverly Hills Hotel like an avenging angel in Armani. Tall, sharp-featured, with prematurely gray hair she wore like a crown, she commanded attention without seeking it. When she embraced Sophia in the hotel suite, it was the first genuine warmth Sophia had felt in weeks. "Show me," Rachel said without preamble. Sophia laid out the documents on the marble coffee table like she was dealing cards in the world's highest stakes poker game. Rachel examined each page with the intensity of a forensic scientist, occasionally making notes on her tablet. After an hour, Rachel sat back with a smile that would have terrified a lesser opponent. "Holy shit, Sophia. This isn't just evidence, this is a nuclear weapon." "What does it mean legally?" "It means Chen Dynamics was technically a partnership from day one, a partnership he never legally dissolved. He absorbed your intellectual property and your ownership stake into his corporate identity, without ever acknowledging or compensating his partner." Rachel's eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. For 24 years, every acquisition, every stock split, every dividend, half of it was legally yours. Sophia felt the room spin slightly. Half of everything? Half of everything. We're not talking about a divorce settlement, sweetie. We're talking about corporate fraud on a scale that makes Bernie Madoff look like a shoplifter. The plan Rachel outlined was surgical in its precision. They wouldn't file a messy public lawsuit that would take years to resolve. Instead, they would apply pressure directly to Chen Dynamics' board of directors and institutional investors. A letter of intent to sue, backed by the Phoenix documents and partnership agreement, would create an existential threat to the company's valuation. "Marcus built his entire identity on being a self-made genius," Rachel explained. "Admitting this was your work would shatter that myth. But more importantly, it throws the legality of his entire stock ownership into question. The board has a fiduciary duty to shareholders. They can't ignore a claim of this magnitude. And if he refuses to settle?" Rachel's smile turned predatory. "Then we burn his empire to the ground and rule over the ashes. Your choice." As Rachel spoke, Sophia felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Power. Not the borrowed power of being Marcus Chen's wife, but her own strength, sharp and clean and devastating. The woman who had been discarded with nothing but a suitcase was about to remind the world that she had never been nothing. She had been the secret architect of one of the greatest fortunes in modern history, and now she was coming to collect what was hers. The war had begun, and Marcus had no idea he was already surrounded.